What if the version of you that you're trying so hard to find never actually existed? What if finding yourself was never the goal? Nietzsche believed that the self isn't discovered, it's created. That who you are isn't hidden under layers of dust and trauma, but something you forge in the fire of experience. To become who you are, he said, you must pass through destruction, rebellion, chaos. Not to find some authentic identity, but to become the kind of person who doesn't need one. The self, to Nietzsche, isn't a fixed truth. It's a work of art, a project, a creation. And most people, he believed, spend their lives copying blueprints that were never theirs, chasing meaning in roles they didn't choose, living lives they didn't author, calling it destiny. But if you're brave enough, you can throw all of it into the fire. You can become the artist of your own existence, the sculptor of a self no one else could have imagined. And that's exactly what Nietzsche wanted for you. Not peace, not comfort, but the courage to stand alone and begin. Chapter 1. The Myth of the Real You. For most of us, the search for identity begins with a question that seems simple. Who am I really? We imagine that somewhere beneath all the roles we play, beneath the expectations of parents, friends, culture, there's a pure, unchanging self just waiting to be uncovered. A true me that's been hidden or buried, but Nietzsche didn't believe in that kind of self. In fact, he thought the idea was a trap. The notion that there's some fixed, authentic version of ourselves out there, like a lost artifact we just need to dust off, is what he called a comforting lie. It promises stability. It gives us something to chase. But it also quietly reinforces the idea that we are passive beings, that our job is simply to find ourselves, not to create ourselves. And for Nietzsche, that was the problem. He believed that this obsession with finding your true self was actually a form of spiritual laziness, a refusal to face the deeper responsibility of shaping who you are. Because what if there is no final, hidden version of you to discover? What if the self is not a noun, but a verb, something you do, not something you are? This is where Nietzsche breaks from many traditional philosophies. He doesn't offer comforting answers. He offers responsibility. He tells you, there is no map to who you are. There is no buried treasure to dig up. There is only what you choose to build. And this isn't meant to be bleak. In fact, it's the opposite. It's liberation. Because if the real you isn't a fixed destination, then you're not bound by any past version of yourself. You're not stuck with the identity you were given at birth. You don't have to live out the roles handed to you by others. You can start again. You can invent. You can evolve. But that also means there's no excuse. You can't blame the world for not understanding you if you've never dared to define yourself. You can't blame society for boxing you in if you're still afraid to step outside the lines. Nietzsche wanted us to stop asking, "Who am I really?" and start asking, "Who do I have the courage to become?" Because identity, in his view, isn't a puzzle to be solved. It's a path to be walked. Not once, but again and again. With intention, with difficulty, with risk. You're not a character in a novel that's already been written. You're the author, and the pen is in your hand. Whether you use it or not, that's up to you. Chapter 2. The Death of God and the Collapse of Meaning. When Nietzsche wrote the now infamous line, "God is dead," he wasn't celebrating. He wasn't mocking religion or trying to shock people with atheism. He was describing a cultural moment, a seismic shift that had already begun. For centuries, people had built their entire lives around the idea of a divine structure, a cosmic order that gave meaning to everything. Morality, purpose, identity, all grounded in something larger than the individual. But as science advanced, as Enlightenment thinking spread, those foundations began to crack. The certainty of religion gave way to the uncertainty of modern life, and Nietzsche knew something enormous had been lost. He believed that without a shared belief in a higher order, society would begin to drift, not just morally, but existentially. Without a North Star, people would flounder, and not because they were weak, but because meaning itself had collapsed. The frameworks that once gave life shape and coherence were no longer trusted, and in their place, silence. That's what he meant by the death of God. It wasn't about theology, it was about structure. A warning that when the old systems die and nothing new rises to take their place, a void opens, a spiritual vacuum. And into that vacuum rushes confusion, nihilism, despair. Nietzsche wasn't nostalgic for religion, but he understood its power. It gave people a sense of order, even if he believed it was based on illusion. The problem was, once you tear down that illusion, what do you build instead? This is where many people get stuck today. We live in a world flooded with information, choices, and freedom, but very little meaning. We're told we can be anything, do anything, believe anything, but no one tells us how to endure the weight of that freedom. And so we escape into distractions, into ideology, into whatever numbs the feeling that nothing truly matters. Nietzsche saw this coming. He feared that most people, when faced with the collapse of meaning, would retreat into what he called herd morality, conforming to whatever gave them comfort, rather than facing the terror of freedom head-on. But he also saw another path, a harder path, one that didn't rely on old myths or borrowed beliefs, one that demanded you create your own meaning, not just intellectually, but through how you live, what you build, and what you're willing to sacrifice for. Because to Nietzsche, the death of God wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a much more difficult and honest kind of life. A life where no one hands you meaning, where you have to forge it yourself. Chapter 3: The Abyss and the Courage to Face It. Nietzsche once wrote, "When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." It's one of his most haunting lines, and also one of his most misunderstood. The abyss isn't hell. It's not a monster. It's something far more unsettling. It's the raw, unfiltered truth of existence without illusions. The abyss is what stares back at you when all your comforts are stripped away. When the stories you've been told no longer hold. When your old beliefs collapse and you're left with the naked question, why am I here? Most people spend their lives avoiding this moment. We busy ourselves with routines, relationships, ambitions, not because they're meaningless, but because they protect us from facing the full weight of that question. And Nietzsche understood why. The abyss is terrifying. It doesn't offer answers. It doesn't reassure. It simply is infinite, silent, empty of all guarantees. But Nietzsche didn't believe we should run from it. Quite the opposite. He believed that true strength begins the moment you stop running, when you stop clinging to old beliefs just because they're comfortable, when you're willing to face the terror of not knowing and stand there anyway. To him, courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about confronting fear without sedation, It was about turning toward the chaos inside and saying, even if nothing is certain, I will still choose to live. This is what Nietzsche called active nihilism, not collapsing under the weight of meaninglessness, but using that collapse as a foundation to build something new, to become, in his words, the poet of your life. But first, you must stand at the edge of the abyss and not flinch. That means letting go of the need for validation, letting go of the need to always be right, always be certain, always be in control. It means allowing space for doubt, real doubt, and not rushing to fill it. Nietzsche believed that most people are too afraid to do this. They'd rather retreat into ideology, groupthink, or distraction. But those who are willing to stay with the discomfort, to face the abyss without blinking, are the ones who discover something deeper. Inner strength, creative fire, and a sense of meaning that isn't borrowed, but forged. Because when you survive the gaze of the abyss, when you don't collapse but breathe into that emptiness, something awakens. A new kind of self. Not a self built on approval or belief, but on endurance, will, and freedom. And in that moment, you begin to understand what Nietzsche meant when he said, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Chapter 4. Becoming the Übermensch, a new kind of human. When Nietzsche introduced the concept of the Übermensch, or the overman, he wasn't talking about a superhero, a ruler, or some genetically superior being. He was talking about an internal transformation, a kind of human who lives beyond the herd, a human who has faced the collapse of old values and dares to create their own. The Übermensch isn't someone who plays by the rules of the past. They are someone who makes new rules, not for power, but for authenticity. They don't inherit meaning. They invent it. After the death of God, after the fall of traditional moral structures, Nietzsche didn't leave us with despair. He left us with a challenge. Will you become strong enough to carry your own meaning? That's what the Übermensch does. They carry the weight of existence without collapsing. They don't need external validation because they've forged something stronger inside, a compass that points not to comfort, but to truth. Becoming this kind of human is not easy. It's not glamorous. It often means walking alone. It means being misunderstood. It means risking failure. But Nietzsche believed this was the only path toward real freedom. Not freedom from something, but freedom for something. Freedom to shape your life like a sculpture, to make art out of your suffering, to say, yes, this world is hard. Yes, it is imperfect, but I will still choose to affirm it. This is the spirit of the Übermensch. Radical responsibility. Refusing to be a victim, refusing to follow blindly, and choosing every day to become the author of your own life. Not in rebellion, but in creation. You see, the Übermensch doesn't reject morality to be cruel. They reject second-hand morality in order to live truthfully. Not what others say is good, but what feels deeply right, aligned, and alive. They're not anarchists. They're not narcissists. They're creators, builders of new ways of being. But this doesn't happen overnight. It happens through inner work, through shedding the masks, the borrowed identities, the cheap comforts, through choosing meaning over safety, through choosing responsibility over blame, and through the willingness to become someone the world has never seen, because you've stopped copying and started becoming. This is the next step in Nietzsche's philosophy. After the abyss, after the fall of illusions, there is a possibility a possibility to rise, not back into who you were, but forward into who you're meant to be. And Nietzsche reminds us, very few will take this path. Most will return to comfort, ideology, and noise. But for those who accept the challenge, a different kind of life becomes possible. Chapter 5. Eternal Return. Would you live this life again? Nietzsche's idea of eternal return is one of the most haunting questions in all of philosophy, and he posed it not as a theory, but as a test, a mirror held up to your soul. Imagine this. What if right now, everything you've ever done, every mistake, every joy, every regret, will repeat itself endlessly, over and over, again and again, exactly as it happened? Every laugh, every heartbreak, every boring day, every electric moment, every word you've spoken, every time you stayed silent, nothing changes, no edits, no escape, just repetition, eternal repetition. How would you respond to that? Most people recoil from the idea, why would I want to relive my suffering, my losses, my mistakes? But that's precisely the point. Nietzsche wasn't asking you to believe in eternal return, literally. He was asking, are you living a life you'd be willing to live again? Not in a fantasy version, not with different outcomes, but this life, with all of its imperfections. If the answer is no, then maybe something needs to change. Not someday. Now, eternal return is a spiritual weight test. It presses on you. It forces you to look at your life with brutal honesty. Are you proud of how you're spending your time? Are your values really yours? Are you chasing what matters or what's easy? Because Nietzsche believed that when you live in such a way that you could affirm your life, even in repetition, that is the highest expression of strength. Not strength in domination, but strength in affirmation, in saying yes to your existence, exactly as it is. This doesn't mean your life has to be perfect. It means you live with intention, that you take ownership of your path, your desires, your failures, that you build a life so meaningful, even the pain in it feels worth it. You see, eternal return isn't a punishment. It's a challenge, a filter, a call to authenticity. Most people live as if life is a rough draft, something they'll fix later. But what if later never comes? What if this is it? Nietzsche's question cuts through the noise. Would you be willing to relive today? Not every day needs to be profound. Not every hour needs to be productive. But taken together, is your life something you could affirm? Something you could love? Not passively, but actively, fiercely. Because in the end, the point of eternal return isn't to scare you. It's to wake you up, to pull you out of numbness, to stop you from sleepwalking through your only shot at being alive. And when you finally begin to live like that, not for eternity, but for this moment, you start to see how powerful you truly are. Chapter 6. Becoming Fire. Turning Suffering into Strength. For Nietzsche, suffering wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a raw material, something to be shaped, refined, and ultimately transformed. He believed that the greatest individuals didn't avoid suffering. They used it. They turned their wounds into fuel, their pain into power, their solitude into strength. He once wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." In other words, your chaos, your confusion, your inner battles, they are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are the beginning of creation, the early notes of a deeper song. But most people never listen. They run from their discomfort. They medicate it, drown it, deny it, and in doing so, they miss the very thing that could have made them whole. Nietzsche called for a different path. He called it becoming fire, not metaphorically, but existentially. He believed that to become who you truly are, you must be willing to burn, to let go of false identities, inherited beliefs, and shallow ambitions, to allow the fire of life, with all its unpredictability and pain, to burn away what's not essential. And here's the paradox. What survives the fire isn't weaker. It's purer, stronger, more you. This is the path of the Übermensch, the one who transcends victimhood, bitterness, and fear, and instead becomes a creator of meaning. Not because life gave them the perfect conditions, but because they chose to respond with courage. You don't need to be fearless to begin. You don't need to have it all figured out. You simply need to choose again and again to stay awake, to face the world as it is, and to meet your pain not with despair, but with a fierce kind of love. The kind that says, even this, I will use. There's a moment in every life where you realize that the world may never fully understand you, that no one is coming to save you, and that the responsibility and the power to shape your life is yours alone. That moment can break you, or it can forge you. When you stop asking, why me, and start asking, what now? You've taken your first step into the fire. And when you come out the other side, scarred maybe, humbled definitely, you'll realize that you are not what happened to you. You are what you became because of it. Nietzsche didn't promise comfort. He promised meaning. And meaning, he believed, is what makes suffering bearable, even beautiful. Because it's through your pain that your character is formed. Through your loss that your values are clarified. Through your struggle that your voice is found. So don't wish the fire away. Become it. Let it light the path not just for yourself, but for others walking through the dark. If something in this video resonated with you, consider subscribing, not for algorithms, but to stay connected to ideas that challenge and nourish you. We don't offer easy answers here, just better questions. You're not alone in your search, and if you've made it this far, you've already taken the first step. Welcome back to yourself.